The latest thing going on all over the world is diversity, inclusion, and implicit bias. As a lawyer, you know that discrimination is wrong. We live by a code of conduct. We follow the rules. We live, breathe, and eat the Constitution. So what does this have to do with us as lawyers? We're fair-minded. Lawyers and judges, this is what we do. We're always fair. Here's the thing. Every single human being has implicit or unconscious bias. So if you're a human being, stay tuned because we're going to cover more of this. Because in this video, I'm going to share with you 8 things for you to keep in mind so that you don't get caught in the implicit bias trap. So what exactly is implicit bias? When I was in my late 20s, I moved to California, to the Bay Area, and there's a large Hispanic population in the Bay Area. Well, I have almond-shaped eyes, and back then I even had longer, very dark, almost black hair. And I can't even count the number of times people would come up to me who were Hispanic, and they would start speaking Spanish immediately, assuming I was Hispanic myself. Well, I'm not Hispanic. I don't speak Spanish. I took French in school. Did they intend harm? No, of course not. They thought they were actually including me because they thought I was Hispanic. But actually, I'm half Japanese. But that's implicit bias. And when I just told you I was half Japanese, did you think, I wonder if she's good at math? Well, that's implicit bias too. We all have these implicit biases. Every lawyer, every judge, every human being. Now imagine for a moment. I became a certified ski instructor a number of years ago, but when I first joined the ski school, I wasn't that good of a skier, and I certainly knew nothing about ski instruction. But I had this wonderful mentor, amazing skier, amazing teacher, and this mentor dragged me all over the mountain, places that scared me, so that I would become a better skier and a better instructor. Now, I have a question. When you were imagining my mentor, what did you see in your mind's eye? Did you see a 60-something-year-old black man? Well, my mentor was exactly that, a 60-something-year-old black man. But that's not usual or familiar on a ski slope. Implicit bias is that we have a tendency for our brains to go right to where it's familiar because our brains don't like unfamiliar. If you've done any studying about stress, when we're faced with unfamiliar, we go into stress. Cortisol starts pumping in our system, and a lot of bad things happen to our bodies and our minds. So it's not uncommon for your brain to go right to something it's familiar with and not go to everything that I have in my mind when I'm telling the story. So implicit bias are these assumptions. They're based on our experience. What we're familiar with becomes the shortcuts that the brain takes. They're not evil, they're not good, they're just natural. This is the way our brain works. And it has allowed our species to survive for millions of years. But here's an example of a bias that might trigger something not so good. Let's take a woman who's walking down the street and she sees a black man, and then she grabs her purse and holds it a little bit tighter against her body. Well, it turns out that black man was Nelson Mandela. But her reaction was a result of implicit bias. In her mind, her brain concluded that black men were dangerous. Before taking into account who the individual was, she responded and reacted. That is implicit bias that has gone in the negative direction as opposed to an implicit bias that's either neutral or in a positive direction. The problem with these unconscious biases is that we are unaware of them. Because we're unaware of them, we fail to check ourselves, and then they trigger behaviors that may be unwelcome by others against whom the bias is. So to avoid trouble, we're going to use the word implicit as an acronym for 8 things to do to stop the spread of inadvertent bad behavior from implicit bias. I is introspection. we need to explore and identify our own biases by taking a moment to just examine what's going on in our own brains, in our own reactions, and start really learning about ourselves and pausing and asking ourselves questions and questioning our assumptions before we act. M is mindfulness. Typically, we react to implicit bias because it creates a stressful situation. Perhaps you're under a time pressure, and usually this causes us to kind of go into a stress with the unfamiliar, and then we just react with the implicit bias. So instead, let's reduce our stress, and we're just going to focus on our breathing and become mindful before we act on the implicit bias. Perspectives, that's the P. Consider experiences outside of yours and other people's perspectives. One way to do this is to study different cultures, to meet people from different diverse groups, and get to know individuals and learn from them as to what is their point of view. Often by just exposing ourselves to different perspectives and different points of view, the unfamiliar becomes familiar, and it reduces a lot of the implicit bias that we're carrying with us to this point. The next is L, is for laid back. In other words, relax and slow down before interacting with individuals who might be part of a group that you might have a stereotype about. Just lay back, slow down, and just calm yourself so that you have an opportunity to reflect before you respond. The next I is individualize. Evaluate people individually based on their characteristics and avoid jumping to conclusions until you get to know the person. Next is communication. Check our language, our messaging, the words that we use. It makes no sense to say, I don't see color, or I'm colorblind when we're talking about racial or ethnic issues, because color is there. Rather, notice the difference and learn to take steps to accept the difference as being that, just a difference, but getting to know the individual. Institutionalize fairness, that's the next I. Support diversity of culture and diversity of people in your organization. So creating teams that have diverse perspectives, helping each other discover about each other, and even in social settings, include somebody at the lunch table that you might not know because you haven't gotten to know people from that group. Invite them over. When you are having an office gathering, go out of your way to meet people who are from diverse groups. Again, just getting to know people, and make that a common practice in your law firm, in your organization. The next is the T, the last one, and that is to train. Resisting implicit bias is a lifelong journey. This is just built into our brains. So we have to constantly restart the process, constantly look for new ways to improve ourselves, to be able to catch ourselves. Becoming aware and then deciding the action to take is a two-step process, two-step training process that we have to undertake for the rest of our lives. I was doing research for a continuing legal education course on implicit bias when I came across this acronym of using the word implicit. It was originally created by AAFP, the American Academy of Family Physicians, and it was published in August of 2019. I took their acronym, modified it a little bit, but I have to give credit where credit is due. Implicit bias occurs, like I said, to everybody, and it is prominent in the legal profession, in the medical profession, but being aware of it, we can do better. We can be more inclusive. We can allow for diversity without having these automatic reactions. So just remember, the word implicit stands for introspection, mindfulness, perspectives, laid back, individualize, communicate, and institutionalize fairness, and finally, train. And get control of your unconscious bias and control of your behavior and reaction before it gets you into trouble. And I'll see you back here on From Porch Lawyer.